Okay, today we're going to take a look at square roots of irrational numbers. So write this down as your title. Here's some vocabulary. There are some spaces here because I will want you to add some information in. So pause as we go along. If you want to hit pause right now, just leave a couple lines in between each statement here. So we have an irrational number. So definitely write the word irrational number down. Write this definition. An irrational number is any number that can't be written as a ratio of integers. Okay, a ratio of integers is the same thing as fraction. Okay, so that's a fraction. So it's any number that cannot be written as a fraction. We're going to go through a couple examples of what that even looks like in a second. All right, so our first instance, so example 1, is the square root of a non-perfect square. So write that down, and then let's look at some examples. Remember, I'm going to just keep talking. You pause along the way and copy as you need. Or pause as you need to copy. You got to copy everything. So square root of a non-perfect square. Here's what we're looking at. Square root of 2. Okay, that's a non-perfect square. 2 is not a perfect square, so the square root of 2 is going to be an irrational number. Square root of 5. Okay, again, any square root that is not perfect. Number 2, a non-terminating, non-repeating decimal. Terminating means to end. So doesn't end, doesn't repeat. Anytime you see a decimal, let's say 3.376, the minute you see the dot, 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 okay, the dot, dot, dot indicates that it's not going to end. Okay, it's going to go on forever. I'm running out of room here. So not ending, that's what those 3 dots mean. So anytime you see those 3 dots, that means it's not going to end. And if they're the way you know that there's a pattern or that it repeats is you have that repeating bar. So if you don't see the repeating bar and you don't see an end, those 3 dots means it's an irrational number. Now on a side note, we're going to be looking at the calculator in a second. If you're using a calculator, the calculator ends every fraction or every decimal when it runs out of room. So that's something to keep in mind. That does not make it an ending or a terminating decimal. So be careful of that. So a non-terminating, non-repeating decimal. And number 3, if you do happen to be given a fraction, if it contains an irrational number, it is also irrational. So make sure you copy that down. Here's an example of what you might see. Pi is one of our most famous irrational numbers. So if you had pi over 3, this whole thing is irrational. Okay. If you had a fraction that had square root of 2, that's a square root of 2. Say square root of 2 over 5. Because square root of 2 is irrational, the whole fraction is irrational. Okay. Remember, our definition is any number that cannot be written as a ratio of integers. Square root of 2 is not an integer. Pi is not an integer. The numbers in the fraction would have to be integers for it to be rational. Or it could be written as an integer. Okay, if it's a decimal, could you turn that decimal into an integer? Probably. Okay, so get all of this copied, including the example. So hit pause if you need to. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is how to, what to do with square roots that are not perfect or irrational. So I want you to copy down the word calculator and write this down. Find the square root using a calculator. Seems pretty simple. You've done it before. You type the number and hit the square root symbol. But there are a couple details that are important for you to know that are going to be expected of you in this class. So we want you to copy down these 2 steps. If not told, round to the nearest hundredth. Hundredths place is what it really should say. Oops. That says place, by the way. So round to the nearest hundredths place, if not told. And then number 2, always use the approximate symbol, not the equal sign. And I'll show you what that means in a second. All right, so our first example is square root of 2. Now you can pull out your calculator. I'm going to. Square root of 2 is approximately 1.41. Now again, a couple situations that we have happening here. I rounded to the nearest hundredth, and then I use these wavy equal sign. The wavy equal sign is approximately. What that tells the reader is that this number is not exact. It tells the reader that you rounded. Because right now I have a decimal that doesn't, or a decimal that is ending, and a decimal that ends is a rational number. Square root of 2 is an irrational number. So this wouldn't make sense if I put an equal sign, because square root of 2 does not equal 1.41. It's close, but this, again, this approximate sign tells the reader that you rounded. It doesn't always mean the numbers are rational. All it means is that you rounded, but it does tell the person that they may need to look into this a little bit better if we're determining rational versus irrational. And it tells the reader that it's not an exact. It's close. Now, in the next one I want you to look at is square root of negative 10, or negative square root of 10. That's what we have to decide what's happening here. Am I finding the square root of negative 10? No, I'm finding negative square root of 10. Two completely different things. From this point on, if you don't see anything in front, you can assume it's positive. If you see the negative in front, that means my answer is automatically going to end up a negative. So I just transfer my negative sign over, and then I find the square root of 10, which is 3.16 when I round. Oops. So, square root of 90. There's no sign in front, so I'm going to assume it's positive. So it's approximately 9.49. I want you to do the last one by yourself. You should have gotten approximately negative 23 point, I'm going to run out of room here. 23 and 49 hundredths. Okay, so the two things that you've learned today, hopefully, is round to the hundredth if you're not told, and use that approximate symbol. Also, if there's a negative in front, your answer will be negative. Okay, the second method is approximation. So copy down the word approximation and copy my steps here. All right. So number 1 says determine which two perfect squares the number is between. 2, find the perfect number that's closer. 3, determine the square root of that number. So here's what we're doing. I'm going to find two perfect squares that the number 2 falls between. So if you look at your multiplication chart and you just focus on your perfect squares, 2 would be between 1 and 4. Okay, those are the two perfect squares that it's between. So when I look at my square roots, if I were to use a number line, two is going to be somewhere in between, excuse me, hold on. Sorry about that. Square root of 1 is 1. Square root of 4 is 2. So the square root of 2 is going to be somewhere in between these two numbers. Okay. Now, is number 2 says find the perfect number that is closer. Is 2 closer to 1 or is 2 closer to 4? It's closer to 1. Okay. So that means that 2 is going to be closer to the number 1. Okay, so my answer would be square root of 2 is approximately 1. So again, you find out which is closer to in the perfect squares, and then your final answer has to be the number that's been square rooted. And we'll look at a couple more in a second too. Okay, negative square root of 10. Now if we look at our perfect squares, 10 is between 9 and 16. Okay. Now here's something to keep in mind though. See how we have negatives? when we're dealing with negatives, the larger digits actually are smaller. If you think about it, if we look at the distance from 0, negative 16 is further away from 0 than negative 9. Okay, so kind of keep that in mind. Okay, so when we have negatives, we kind of go in the different order. So negative square root of 10 is between negative square root of 16 and negative square root of 9. Which number is 10 closer to? 10 is closer to 9. Okay, it's only 1 away. So when I look at my number line, the negative square root of 16 simplifies to negative 4. Negative square root of 9 simplifies to negative 3. And negative square root of 10 is somewhere in between. It is closer to 9, so my answer would be negative 10 is approximately negative 3. Now if you go back and look at the last page of notes, when we use the calculator, negative 10 is closer to negative 3 than it is to negative 4, isn't it? Okay, so you can always type it into the calculator and determine is it closer to which whole number is it closer to, and check yourself. Okay, let's look at a couple more. Oops. Okay, so which two perfect squares is 90 in between? It's going to be between 100 and 81. Which number is 90 closer to? Is 90 closer to 81 or is 90 closer to 100? Barely closer to the square root of 81. It's 9 away, the other was 10 away. So when I look at my square roots on the number line, square root of 81 is 9, square root of 100 is 10. And square root of 90 is barely closer to 9. So I would say the square root of 90 is approximately 9. That would be my answer. Okay. Now we can look at this a different way. If you didn't want to use the number line, I could write it out like this. I could say square root of 81 is 9, square root of 100 is 10, square root of 90 is approximately 9 because it is closer. Okay. And our last one here, negative 252. It's in between square root of 225 and square root of 256. Now, negative 220. Now, if you take a look, remember we're doing negative, so I actually made a mistake here. I need to rearrange these because the larger the digits, the further from 0. So 256 and 225. Which number is 252 closer to? It's closer to 256. Now, the negative square root of 256 is negative 16. Negative square root of 225 is negative 15. So square root of 2, now if I look here, negative 16, negative 15. Square root of 252 is approximately negative 16. Okay, make sure you get all those copied. Okay, I want you to practice these on your own. Once you've done whatever you need to do, whatever work you want to show, write the problems and write the answer with your work. Pause right now, work them out, and see if you get the same answers that I do. Okay, so pause the video and check your answers to the first two compared to mine. I showed two different ways of doing the work. If you did it on the left-hand side and you just wrote the square roots on each side and the numbers, you could have answered, square root of 39 is approximately 6 as your answer, and negative square root of 78 is approximately negative 9 as your answer here, or you could have done the work like I did on the right. Now, if you're struggling with the negatives, I just want to give you a little bit of an idea of how you can figure it out. With square root of 15, I know that it's between 16 and, I know it's going to be between 16 and 9. But maybe you don't know the order. Maybe you know those two numbers. You know it's going to be between 16 and 9, and you know it's closer to 16, but the whole number line and what order everything goes in is a struggle. All you have to do is just write down like I did, negative 16, negative square root of 9, and find the square roots of those. The square root of negative 16 is negative 4. The square root of negative 9 is negative 3. and then place them on the number line. Placing them on the number line should not be difficult. Okay. If you're asked to use a number line, you need to know how to do that and be prepared for that. But who cares what order it is to start? Get your square roots, and then you can put them on the number line and say, oh, okay, negative square root of 16 comes first, then negative square root of 9. Negative square root of 15 is closer to negative square root of 16. So the negative square root of 15 is approximately negative 4. Okay. All right, next up, you need to be able to write inequalities using greater than and less than signs with our square root symbols. Okay, there's nothing different. All we have happening here is I'm going to do a little work to the side. I know that the number 26 is between negative 25 and negative 36. It's going to be between those two. But maybe I don't know which box is which. I need to know which number is negative square root of 26 bigger than and less than. So negative square root of 25 simplifies to negative 5. Negative square root of 36 simplifies to negative 6. Which is smaller? Negative 6 is smaller, so negative square root of 36 is going to go first. Negative square root of 25 is going to go in the second box. You try the other two, and I'll put the answers up in just a second. Okay, so take a look and compare your answers to mine. One thing I do want you to notice, in the first problem, there's a little bit of a change that we made. Our answers needed to be using integers, so you cannot have the square roots to the left and the right. You want to use integers, so make sure you change that. If you already have it written that way, that's fine. Underneath it, just write it the way I wrote it here. Okay, I have the work shown. So pause, check yourself, ask questions now if you have any misunderstandings. That's it.